Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Pioca. Today is January 10, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with a bunch of peace activists and James Joyceans to study and discuss in art stop war. But we got to stop the press. Have you heard the latest? It isn't out yet. We've changed the title to Only Art Stops War. And that is because we're about to participate in the art of the salon. And Horace's definition of the salon was saying that it's following the aims of poetry to please and to educate. So I think that's what we're pretty much here ready to do, is to please ourselves in the world that peace is the way, and to educate them that war doesn't work.
The what?
And so we're going to ask everybody to participate in round robin. If you need to say something during the round robin question, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. I welcome anecdotes, stories, tangents. It's all good. But so we don't talk over each other, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. So I think we'll start with Jim Miller, because Jim has taught me through Maria Gimbutas, in the words of Joseph Campbell Soup, that an actual age of harmony and peace in accord with the creative energies of nature, which for a spell for some 4,000 prehistoric years anteceded the 5,000 of what James Joyce termed the nightmare, from which it is now certainly time for this planet to wake. So it's pretty much a nightmare that we've experienced. And this was in the foreword of Gimbutas' 1989 book, The Language of the Goddess. So Jim, just give us a little rundown. Most people would say that humans are born innately to be violent. They kind of blame it on, well, I got to survive, because if someone's going to come and attack me, I've got to attack them. And maybe you'll fill us in what Maria kind of wanted people to learn from her studies in archaeology and anthropology.
Yes, what she showed was that people for 4,000 years that she surveyed, that archaeology shows us, people didn't resort to violence with each other. There were, in the burials of these towns and villages of Eastern Europe and around the Mediterranean, there were no weapons in the graves. There was no art that showed warriors, that glorified heroic exploits with spears and swords. None of that. There were these peaceful communities, hundreds of them, if not more, scattered through the river valleys of, like, the Danube and in what is now Romania, around the Black Sea, around the Mediterranean Sea. So it's the archaeology's undeniable and incontrovertible, really. There aren't weapons. The weapons start to show up later, and we're familiar with that part because that's the nightmare that James Joyce and then Joseph Campbell referred to. The nightmare begins with the war industry from the steppes. Now, do we want to talk about that, or should we talk about Maria Gimbutas? A little bit about Maria.
Well, hold on, Jim. We'll go back to Maria throughout our salon, but let's just go round robin. These are intelligent people we're with, and they've lived long lives. We'll start with you, Peter Quadrino. Our Are we hardwired to be violent? Is it human? Is it innate to be violent?
Wow. Oh, wow. Good question.
Well, that's good, and you can contemplate it. We can come back to you, but we're asking for your off the cuff first thought, best thought. And just because Jim laid that groundwork, that doesn't mean we're not entertaining everyone's points of view, because in the little blurb that Jim and I are writing, or he's helped me write, is the basic line is, we are not naturally violent. But I think most people tell me we are. So maybe it's that. Are we naturally violent? I know we're hardwired for cooperation. That's a good counter to that question. But just off the top of your head, Peter, how do you feel? Are we innate to be violent?
I would say probably no. Like when really horrific acts of war or terrorism, things like that happen, people use words like savage, like it's savagery, because it's it's kind of pre-human, some of these things. And most other species, like we have, the difference with us is we can communicate. We can communicate with people all over the world. We communicate with people that speak totally different languages, and so that just having that ability seems like it would help us resolve things, or eventually some version of human society will learn to resolve things without being violent.
Good, Peter. Zool, you're up.
Yeah, well, I have many thoughts on this, but first a question for Jim. That archaeological evidence that you're finding around the Danube, would you say, and do you have evidence to show that these were goddess-centered societies?
Yes, yes, that was one of her points, that the shift to God-centered societies had not happened yet.
Yeah, and that's the point that I take, because the image that came to mind as you're speaking and as Jerry posed the question, is the opening scene from 2001. Here's a Homo sapien. He's looking, among the wreck of this carcass, and he pulls out a bone that he suddenly realizes that he can use to make his kill of his next bit of food easier, or maybe to ward off the Neanderthals who might want a bit of that meat, But I wanted to go back just to the title of this salon, "Can Art Stop War?" And so it's got that really interesting, dangling semiotic following, that makes it a question. And I wonder, as Hawking said when asked if there's a God, he said, well, there are questions that can be answered and questions that aren't even questions. So I don't know that this is a question. I take it more as a prompt. And I have a lot more to say on this, but I want to hear more from the other members of the
Right. That was good, Zool. I didn't put a question. I called, "Can art stop war?" And I didn't put a question mark because it's assumed it is a question. But then Peter Coogan suggested we change it to "Only art can stops wars." So the question, though, to you, Zool, just off the top of your head, are we hardwired to be violent?
I don't know. I don't think it's a question that can be answered. I think we're as I don't even want to use the word humans. You man rather than you woman. You human rather than you some other living creature. I don't know that we can say that. I think that what we do know about our species, whatever we call it now, we're makers. We make art, we make war, we make love, we make peace, we make trouble, we make all kinds of things. But I don't know if there's anything that's unnatural. Here we are. Nature is not supernatural. Nature is super in and of itself.
Yeah. Zool, brilliant answer, because I want to stress, just because I ask a question doesn't mean you have to answer it. That's Rebecca Solnit's wise words. I'm all for someone saying, I don't know, or saying, I can't answer that, or it's both and it's neither and it depends. So I'm open. Just because I'm asking the question doesn't mean you have to answer it. Very good, Zool. Okay, Patrick, you're up. Are we hardwired to be violent?
Well, I'm always suspicious of arguments that use that phrase myself, because, I mean, obviously, the record would show that we're capable of not being violent, and the record also shows that we are capable of being incredibly violent. And hence, that's all natural, because if it wasn't in our nature, we couldn't do it. It's that simple. But that's just my simplistic view of nature. I do think that, Sartre attributed a lot of social conflict to scarcity, the notion of scarcity, i.e., resources are not enough to distribute them evenly throughout the world or something like that. But it's also, it seems to me, the problem is also the dialectical relationship between scarcity and need or demand or desire. Because historically, as we become more productive and our tastes, our desires, our expectations alter historically, so that as inequality begins to develop, it's very difficult for someone at the bottom to look at the top and not want some of what they have, and then if you apply this to a kind of international or context, it inevitably leads to war and conflict, because people feel the need to protect their privilege, whatever they perceive as their particular privilege. Yeah. So I don't know what the solution is. I don't know that art can solve it, but I do think that, for me, at any rate, I see it as an ongoing struggle, and that one should never give up. But one should also be realistic as to
Really, really well put, Patrick. And I always appreciate your input and everyone's ears. And Zool did anticipate the next question, which you can start thinking about, is what does it mean to be human? And you covered the waterfront there, Patrick, in so many ways. And you touched on causality, which is McLuhan's main thing is, well, what leads to this? What is the cause? So we don't ever know. We think we can prove what causes what, but you can't really. You can study patterns and come up with some sort of comprehensive awareness. But that's the beauty of I'm ambivalent about ambiguity. So it leads right to you, Roy. Roy, are we hardwired to be violent?
I think, yeah. I mean, if the potential is always there to be violent, I don't see it as because of one group of people established war. Although I guess. I think art, art can either promote or discourage war, and I think possibly one of the reasons that the West is traditionally more violent is, one of the founding works of art was the Iliad, the great war story. It's very, very bloody, but in some ways, beautiful, spectacular book, but it had, I think its influence reverberates in Western society. And I just want to point out one thing. Blake, he talks about that Shakespeare and Milton were curbed by the infection from the silly Greek and Latin slaves of the sword, and he wanted to set up a counter sublime, which he saw as the Bible, which actually kind of astounds me, because I think the Bible is as warlike or promotes war, I think, even more than the Iliad. But it's a problem, and one would hope that saner heads prevail. But that has not been historically the case. And
Thank you, Roy. That was very good. Duncan, you're up.
The answer is no, we're not hardwired. It's one of the options. Usually an option that's brought about either through the moral failings of greed or fear.
Yeah.
I do believe that Jim Miller is right. There have been periods of our humanness that have been fairly peaceful. They were generally, from my understanding, small, hobbit-like Neolithic village periods where there was no real population pressures, and where to Marshall Salins would say that in these areas that actually people could earn a basic living with very little work, so that there was lots of time for art. And that in these some of these villages, on a daily basis, there would be a gathering together to tell stories, play music, talk mythology, etc. However, we are long past that. There might be a few hidden groups in the Amazon, or perhaps even in the Philippine Islands that still exist. I myself am a great admirer of the Aboriginals, Australians, as I understand them. But the war thing is going full tilt. It is strongly supported by technology. Usually with the idea that if we have the advanced technology, let's go get them fuckers because we can do it. Okay. But are we hardwired? No.
Thank you, Duncan. I appreciate that answer. And Jim, you're up.
Me?
Are we hard?
Am I the only Jim here? Yes. Okay.
Are we hardwired for violence?
We are hardwired for defensive violence, I'm sure. If we're attacked, if anyone is attacked, of course they're fighting back. I would say we're not hardwired for the institution or the industry or the technology of war, exploited technology of war. That is an artifact of our development technologically and unfortunately culturally. So no, not hardwired. We're hardwired for cooperation. Yeah. Hardwired for even love amongst our fellow villagers. We're going back to the global village, or the global theater. So why not exploit the love industry for a while?
Yeah, this is good. Zool, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to rephrase the question a little bit, because I think we get a very different answer, perhaps, if rather than saying, are we hardwired for violence, which will bring me to talking about the singularity, but not just yet, as opposed to do we have it in our DNA, which I think then is about freeze, fight or flight. But, when you invited me to this, Jerry, I immediately thought of a particular passage in the Wake, which I think totally describes what we're doing now. And if you gentlemen, and please, I use that word carefully, don't mind, I'd like to read that little passage, if that's okay.
Please do. What page is it?
It's page 94.
Yeah.
The elm that whimpers at the top told the stone that moans when stricken. Wind broke it, wave bore it, reed wrote of it, Seiss ran with it, hand tore it, and wild went war. Hen treeved it, and plight pledged peace. It was folded with cunning, sealed with crime, uptied by a harlot, undone by a child. It was life but was it fair? It was free, but was it art? The old hunks on the hill, read it to collection.
That was beautiful, dude. That made me cry. And I wanted to get into the wake eventually, but since you forced us into the deep end right off the bat, that's how you teach kids how to swim. You just throw them in the middle of the lake. That's what you did so well. And, I wanted to set it up. This is a manifesto for peace, as we know. And, I wanted to ask Peter beforehand, or any of you, how many times is the word war in the wake? And how many times is the word peace in the wake? So it's a complicated question because there's the word peace. Peace as a noun with a D, making it a verb. And then there's a million references to the word war because you can start studying aware has the word war in the middle of it. Backward has the word war in the middle of it. So it's like, then how do you define the parameters? Because we're hoping that there's more peace in the wake than there is war. Because like Peter, you taught me, there's war referenced on every page of the wake. And Peter's written a great essay about this. And we're in the midst of doing much deeper article about the wake as a peace manifesto, and could it actually stop the war? Auden the poet said the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. So I'll just cut to the chase, and we will get into the wake. How do we stop our governments from going to war? We'll start with you, Roy, and go back around.
Stop the government from going to war. Preventing bad people from gaining power, I guess. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But getting back to the wake, it did remind me. I forget exactly where in the wake, but he does refer to the myth. It's an old Irish myth that there were two brothers, and one was nurtured on milk, and one was nurtured on blood, and the one who was nurtured on milk was peace-loving and gentle, and the one that was nurtured on blood was warlike and violent. And it's not like everybody is hardwired for violence, and certainly certain people are hardwired for peace. But there's a certain percentage, I think, of humans that are always going to be hardwired for violence.
Isaac and Esau in the Bible.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he also says Cain and Abel. That's what Joyce said, that Cain and Abel are the origin of war. So they're very brothers.
And we'll eventually do a tetrad, in Marshall's book, Laws of Media. This is a book that we study weekly. He starts with the line from page 98, which is just 4 pages away from your Zool. The war is in words and the wood is in the world. But he misspells wood. He spells it W-O-O-D, and he meant would, if you could, W-O-U-L-D.
How do you know that?
And as we know, first word.
I've had personal discussions with James Joyce. I know. Okay, Patrick, what was the question I asked you, Roy? Oh, how do we stop our governments from going to war, Patrick?
That I cannot answer. I can't think of a way. I mean, I think someone already said that there's always, I think Roy just said that there's always a segment in our society, in any society in the world, of people who are quick to violence for one reason or another. And I guess my personal view is somewhat pessimistic, and I don't think it's not unsupported by the wake, because the wake's circularity is also a reminder that certain events will recur again and again, kind of like Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence. And so my philosophy has more to do with sustaining the fight for what is good. And, and of course, some people say, you use the word fight.
Yeah.
And but I think struggle and fighting without violence is possible. And I'm not a pacifist, but I'm a strong believer in nonviolent struggle.
Yep.
Because I don't see any, just objectively speaking, I don't see that it's ever anything else has ever worked. I credit Martin Luther King, for the most successful revolution in history. Not because it was perfectly successful, but because if you look at all the other revolutions, what did they lead to?
Yeah.
They all failed in one way or another. So I don't know. But to deal with governments, I mean, especially right now in the context that we're in.
Yeah. It's heavy, Patrick. You brought tears to my eyes because I thought of Bree on Amy Goodman's show the other day. She scaled her way up a flagpole and ripped the Confederate flag down. And that girl I shouldn't say girl, that human did something that really touched me, and it made a news. Did it do anything? Yes, because now she goes to a Biden press conference and yells at him in the middle, and he addresses her.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is nonviolent resistance. I'm not going to let you talk, Mr. President, because I have something to say and you're going to address it. Just like Obama did when Medea from Code Pink yelled at him and he says, I'm going to address you. That's pretty amazing. I think we progressed a little where the presidents get yelled at by the constituents, not the press, and they address it. Okay, Duncan, how do we stop our governments from going to war?
We can't. So we just can't. We can take actions that will have an effect, but they won't stop wars. Because really, establishing peace and non-war, from the particular spot we're at right now, is actually a spiritual development thing. Any attempt by people who are not highly spiritually developed, I'll leave that ambiguous, thank you, to establish peace is doomed to failure. And that's just a fact. You can have an effect. So, until we realize that we as human beings cannot have that effect, while allowing the universe, God, whatever, that it's still a possibility. So, for example, let's say in the middle of a war, we got Ukraine and Russia, we've got the thing going on in Israel, we got the tensions between Taiwan and mainland China. Well, let's assume that there was a major geological event that brought all these countries to their absolute knees. Then there's a possibility, but you and I really can't, we have no effect there. All we can do is we can develop ourselves as best we can under our understanding of how things work and what spirituality is and what peace would represent, with humility to develop ourselves and to try to establish a little bit more of a peaceful reality right where we are. Maybe without saying a single word.
Yeah. Really well done, Duncan. And I'm a little leery because sometimes I think they can seed the clouds and make it rain or cause an earthquake. And who knows, maybe we can hijack that, cause a big nature extravagant thing and get us all to unite because we faked it.
That's not what I'm suggesting.
I took it to an extreme. You took it, you grounded me. Okay, Peter, you're up, and then Jim. Peter, how do we stop our governments from going to war?
I don't know. I don't think that's possible. I think it's a lost cause, like some of you guys have been saying. But Duncan makes such a good point about that. If there was some kind of geological event or something that brought everyone together, so to speak. Because like on a micro level, if you're walking down the street and you see someone get hit by a car, there's just a natural inclination to want to help them out, call an ambulance, whatever. It is really strange how nations will, commit mass killing on another nation and consider that, an achievement or a success in some way. Because again, it's like, what if, your neighboring country had a massive earthquake? Are you going to be happy about that? Or are you going to want to help them? It's weird. But also, on a separate note, I've been learning about the JFK assassination lately, becoming really interested in it. And it seems like a big reason why it happened, unless you are subscribed to the Warren Commission and Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. It seems like a big reason of why it happened is that JFK was trying to create peace and trying to kind of rev down the war machine and follow up what his predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower, had talked about in his final speech about the military-industrial complex. Like JFK was trying to push back, and now he's gone, and we've been at war pretty much continually ever since.
It's really well done, Peter. My friend, my mentor, Phil Chamberlain, taught me about GCD, General and Complete Disarmament. It was basically a policy, a worldwide policy started by some right-wing Russians who said, just disarm the entire world. Not just nuclear, disarm the entire world. And JFK made inclinations that he agreed with GCD. We use it in one of my rap songs where we quote JFK's line, and he believes in GCD, and Phil's philosophy and research said that's why they bumped him off, because he was pushing GCD. So that was good, Peter. Jim, how do we stop our governments from going to war?
Yeah, well, we got to make war unthinkable. War is not a thing that humans should be doing. So how are we going to do that? Yeah, JFK probably was interrupted in his efforts to make peace with the Soviet Union and Cuba. So I don't think can be done with the governments we have or the machinery of the governments we have. Like everybody else here, it's very unlikely that the machinery will grind toward the answer. We have to have some extra change in consciousness, some external change in consciousness. Suppose the women, like in Liza Strada, suppose they just go on strike, which they're pretty near coming to think about. Patriarchy is going down quickly, and the patriarchy is what allows for and in fact expresses itself in war. So there's a chance of a psychological change, and Kubrick couldn't pull it off, although he tried with Dr. Strangelove. That was all about the stupid men who just blunder their way into the machinery of war. It didn't have much of an effect, but I think I see the consciousness building toward it's against reason. War is against reason, and I see that's going to happen.
It's really well put, Jim, and we're leading towards, well, how in the heck can this thing called art ever change anything? Like Auden said, does it activate it or pacifies us? We don't know. That's the mystery of art. But we know, by people like Mallarmé saying everything in the world exists to end up as a book, because we're all book people. We're all print-oriented bastards. Thank God. That's where we come out of. And we use other means like Zoom salons. And I will tell you that Jim brought up a good point with Dr. Strangelove. Our colleague Niall Southern is Terry Southern's son, And Terry was hired to write the funny dialogue in Dr. Strangelove. And somewhere down the line, in a couple months, we're doing another salon with Niall Southern and Jim and whoever else wants to join us, talking with Niall about his dad's work as a writer. And so this is to TV. In the New York Times in 2017, the cable news business model: conflict means urgency, and urgency means viewers glued to the channel. You know, one of our members says, don't watch the news. It's bad for your health. And it's like, good luck. His wife still tells him the news, or he sees it standing in line at a grocery store or hears it. You can't escape the environment of the news. So that's that urgency. Conflict means urgency, and urgency means viewers glued to the channel. It's a machine designed to generate stress and negative emotion. And then he goes into Trump. His entire philosophy has been fighting is humankind's most productive state. And what Zool already brought up, that the fight or flight response is to be savored and cultivated. So Zool contributed a question: what does it mean to be human? Is conflict the most productive state? Is that the human condition? Is fighting humankind's most productive state, whether we're fighting for peace or fighting for war? So, what does it mean to be human? We'll start with you, Duncan.
This is going to sound a little. We actually are at the nexus. We are the connection between the above and the below. And it actually happens at the neck. And when we talk about free will, and when we talk about spiritual growth, we're literally talking about whether we are going to be a proper connection between the natural world and the spiritual world or not. Now, the tendency to go to war and to be in conflict and to work solely on urges is much more from the natural world. But because we're humans and we're in this interesting position between the above and the below, even our attempts to be natural become perverted. There are no animals, or very few animals, that go out and slaughter with abandon. Okay, so this is human beings taking a natural phenomena and exaggerating it. Okay, so to become fully human, really, and a lot of this fact between James Joyce and Dante, that's kind of my world at this particular time. So I'll use Dante, and in the Commedia. The Commedia is a development of a talented but not so great guy who learns the true meaning of free will, justice, and love. And when to the degree that we understand in our bones the meaning of those three, I'll repeat them again. We have justice, free will, and love. To that degree, we truly become human.
Really good. Thank you, Duncan. And we're going to get to Peter next, but Zool has a question. Go ahead, Zool.
Yeah, well, I actually want to go back to your question, Jerry, which I didn't get a crack at before you brought up mine. The one is, how do we get governments to stop war?
Yes.
And I think, Jim's answer is to make it unthinkable. So I think that means, do we hear Rumi? Do we listen to the Dalai Lama? Do we undergo the process of personal transformation, one individual at a time? All right, have we got generations to do that? Perhaps we don't. Duncan's answer, no, is the correct one, because the only answer that would be yes is to get the money out of it. And I think we know that pretty much every single government on the planet at this point, regardless of political ideology, is in, for the most part, the business of endless, of permanent, a war economy. That's really where we are, certainly in terms of the superpower battles and all the wars which are proxy battles. Now to speak of what Patrick brought up, and you, Jerry, in terms of Dr. King, the only way to end violence is through love. Well, that's right out of Spinoza. And Spinoza's recognition about human nature was, most basic. We want revenge. That's what's happening in Gaza right now, between the Israelis and the Gazans, the IDF and Hamas, however you distinguish this. But we can rise to our higher selves, as so many artists and authors, filmmakers have. And you, Jerry, you call yourself a little Leary. You're actually a big Leary, like Professor Tom Leary. And, I think, the wake is our eye on the generations. We wake. We're dead. We wake. Here we are again. Finnegan. And so just look in our personal histories. If we know anything about our own genealogies, with our own families, we know of ancestors who went through very hard times: depression, war, Nakba, Holocaust, slavery, whatever you call that, right? And prosperity, time and again. And each generation, we forget and we remember, we forget and we remember. Finnegan's Wake.
Really good, Zool. That was touching and deep, because I don't want to stray way off from the wake. And I know I want to get to Peter Quadrino's knowledge of the wake, like yours, Zool. In fact, we salute the New York Wake Group, because that's how we met Zool, never knowing he's a Daniel Berrigan freak like me, and he's way into peace activism. But I showed a history of the Vietnam War film once in Venice, California, at our art gallery, Sponto, and we had 60 people packed in this room. And then at the end, I says, in the discussion, I said, the only way we're going to stop war is if no one goes to work and no one buys anything. And the 6 gutter punks in the first row went, that's what we do. And I said, that's bullshit, because you guys buy potato chips. Because everybody buys stuff. If you ask anyone not to buy anything and not to go to work, good luck. But I don't like the line, support the troops. My dad fought in World War II and got a Purple Heart. And then years later, he babysat my sister's sons so they could go protest the war. And I always thought that was my dad's way of saying, hey, I understand. And so, but if someone signs up to kill someone, I don't care if they're getting a college education or what, I don't support them. Sorry. But I'm going off topic. I wanted to go to Peter and tell Peter we are going to get to the wake, but after this round robin question, in which is, what does it mean to be human? And maybe you can pull in the wake if you want. I mean, what does it mean to be human? Yeah.
I mean, are we trying to contextualize humans versus the other species on the planet? I don't know. But I guess what it means to be human is we could reflect on things. We could reflect on the fact that we're conscious. We could reflect on our activities and the activities of those around us, and try to do something or share information somehow and let information travel down to future generations. Like, I don't think any other species are consciously creating or documenting some kind of information so that it'll carry through to the future in any way. I think that's one of the things that makes us human.
Good. Jim, go ahead. What does it mean to be human?
I always thought that we're supposed to be the immune system for the Earth, because only we could stop an asteroid from knocking out the dinosaurs and setting things back 150 million years, or freeing up room for mammals, whatever. But I think that our technology should be aimed at creative rather than destructive ends, and that's once again just a slight little twist in our consciousness, and we could direct ourselves that way.
I like that, Jim. And we're going to talk about art movements in a second. And one of my favorite art movements is the futurist who said, destroy all libraries and museums. Now, I practically live in a library. I go there every day. And I don't like the idea of destroying libraries because I'd lose my safe place. But I do like the fact that humans thought that up and they tried to do it. Okay, Roy, you're up. What does it mean to be human?
Many things. Yeah. I tend to, I like the phrase, existence precedes essence. The fact that I think humans are not predetermined by an essence, that they do somehow cooperate with evolution. Maybe that's what religions are, trying by the type of society that's created. You actually, depress certain parts of potentialities in the human, and you foster others. I don't know how conscious we can be about that, or how. But I did the thing that Patrick said about fighting, ambivalent about the word fighting, because fighting does have that connotation of violence. But in fact, Blake says there's a class of people who want to depress mental and prolong corporeal war, and actually that's what Ellman says that Stephen Dedalus is doing when he says, in here, I must kill the priest and the king, and Joyce certainly was against violence of all sorts, but he said, I am at war with the Catholic Church, I am at war with England. There's a penisolate war. The pen is mightier than the sword, I guess.
Wow, Roy, that's a lot, because Blake also says we become what we behold. Because I hate when they say stop war. I says, don't use the word war. Don't say kill your TV. I don't need those words. But indeed, maybe Joyce is saying I've got to use the tools the master used to change the master's house. Who knows? Okay, Patrick, you're up. What's it mean to be human?
That's a very difficult question. The people that influence me are people I keep hearing echoes, like Blake, Spinoza, Joyce, Marx. And I guess what I feel in practice, what matters to me most is in trying to be human, and where I see a failing time and time again is that, and I've been writing about this in the poem that I work on, which, by the way, I submitted book 3 of my comedy this morning.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
But we tend to see, I believe in evil, but I don't see evil as, a horned demon figure. I see evil as what Alain Badiou calls it. Evil is the subversion or betrayal of truth processes, of truth procedures. But I think one of the things that we do is that we project evil always elsewhere. Somebody else is always evil, and we don't look at the evil in ourselves. In fact, we cover it with others, with other people's evil. And the reason I say that is because I don't know how to stop states from warring with each other. I don't know how to make the world perfect. But I know that from my perspective, unless we embrace our own possibility of evil, we can't even begin to address the process and to challenge it. And, we all have impulses. We all have things we've done we don't even mention. We all have our secrets. And to me, the greatest sin, if I can use that word, and I've said this before in one of our meetings, is looking away and not wanting to look at what's actually going on. And like right now, for example, with the Israel-Gaza situation, for example, it's interesting to watch the different modes people have of looking away, because they don't want to be called an anti-Semite if they're overcritical. And, you know, there are columns every day like anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, you know, this and so forth and so on. On the other hand, they don't want to like go down on record as supporting what Hamas did on September 7. And so how do you address those things? And so the impulse, and it shocked me because I saw a lot of people who I consider to be very intelligent and people I really like, you know, and some of them, you know, basically said, if you're not supporting Israel, please don't communicate with me anymore. And again, it's that you see that evil, and certainly, for example, raping and mutilating a woman is evil, and it goes to your gut. But on the other hand, systematically killing 23 or 24,000 people, including massive numbers of women and children, particularly children, seems to me also pretty evil. And we're all implicated in that, because in one way or another, we have a tendency either to, at some point, participate in it or look away from it. And, you know, and we look away from it sometimes when we won't speak out what we think. I don't mean that if you speak out, it won't happen, or that, you know, because I'm pessimistic about simple solutions. But, you know, to me, to be human is to be caught up in that dilemma, you know, between negotiating with your own impulse towards evil and your desire for something good, for truth, you know, and the difficulty. Just one quick note too. Ever since Trump became political, you know, I've had the most difficult time trying to explain to people, particularly people I care about, people I'm actually close to, you know, members of my family, for example, why one can distinguish between journalism and, I don't even want to say propaganda, because I think propaganda can actually be an honorable term in some contexts, but just distorted modes of reporting. And it's really quite difficult because, you know, we all are aware of the fact, for example, that journalism can be flawed, can make mistakes, can have a point of view, and so forth and so on. And yet there's a difference. And trying to communicate to that somebody who's already decided that everything is distorted anyway, and that you just fight for your point of view, regardless of whatever evidence may be contrary. It's not an easy argument to make or to win, you know? And again, what happens is you decide, okay, the evil guys are over there and I'm on the right. And instead of looking inside at that possibility. So anyway, I probably haven't answered your question.
No, Patrick, you did great as always. We appreciate you being here. And Jacques Ellul made a big influence on McLuhan when he said propaganda is just culture in action. So, you know, we demonize it in America, but some places they don't demonize it. They, you know, I've given out paper flyers my whole life and tell people, whatever you do, don't read it. And the guy goes, do you have anything I could read? You know, but you got to give 100 paper flyers out for one to be effective. So, you know, I still give them out. I don't care. I like them. And now that people go like this, I want you to keep your piece of paper. I'll just shoot a picture of it on my cell phone. I go, no, put it in your pocket and read it later. So also, Bob Goldthwait nailed what you just said. He said, you are what you hate. You know, don't become your enemy. I asked Craig Baldwin, I says, film as an art form has been swindled by capitalism. And he says, yeah, it's our job to swindle it back. And I goes, I don't want to become my enemy. But Frank Zappa said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." And then lastly, Jon Stewart. What's that big article? Jon Stewart spawned Tucker Carlson because Jon Stewart got 25 mil to do the news, whereas Walter Cronkite wasn't. He was just doing the news and getting paid, and it was investigative journalism, but it was entertainment. We know that. So we win a lot, and I wanted to talk about. Joyce's book, Finnegan's Wake, as a Peace Manifesto or a manifesto. That's the word Joyce kind of tweaks to turn manifesto, sort of a group think, into mama, which is female, festa, which is food. Stories are food. So, I wanted to dedicate today's salon to the great Mary Jane Schultz, who went up to heaven and started turning St. Pete into being a feminist and a McGee a couple weeks ago, and taught me a whole lot. And it is the word that Jim taught me, matristic. That's a key word we'll be getting into, which comes out of the word matrix. And my favorite T-shirt slogan at the Rodney King protest was, "The Matrix is a documentary."
We all get along.
Yeah, and that's motherly love indeed. But Peter, let's start with you and saying, how is, because you've written great essays on your blogs. You wrote one about war, In the Wake, and this is Milan Kundera. He said, "Religion and ideology require that someone be right. A good novel challenges that delusion, teaching us to tolerate the essential relativity of things human." So, why did humans invent printed word? Wasn't spoken word enough? Mary Jane said, when we invented printed word, we split the right and left hemispheres apart. So she invented the word splitteracy, and she spelled the S with a $. So it fucked our shit up when we invented printed word. But we're all addicted. Like McLuhan said, word is the most addicting and universal drug. But, once I started reading these ideas that Joyce was promoting peace, I was, wow, can this book do anything? If I just sent out an email a couple days ago that a hot new movie that's just hitting the theaters and streaming services, Miller's Girl, in the 9-second point in the trailer, the English professor points to a copy of Finnegan's Wake, and there's a lot of key little thoughts in that. Coppola did it 20 years ago in his book, Youth After Youth. He showed a copy of Finnegan's Wake, but this is all minor.
And in Good Will Hunting, the boys talk about Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States.
That's it. You got it. Beautiful. And there's so much. So, Peter, give us a little rundown. How is this us reading too much? Or as Duncan would say, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Is it us reading too much in the Wake to call it a peace manifesto?
No, not necessarily. You raised a good question earlier about how many times does the word war appear in the Wake versus how many times the word peace appear in there. There is war on almost every page of the Wake. It seems to be like the reflection of the nightmare of history, Joyce's term from Ulysses. But like the Wake is his history of the world. But there's a section where it's the children's games chapter, and there's a whole passage about it's just imagining the dawn of peace, pure, perfect, and perpetual, waking the weary of the world, something like that. But even right after that sentence, there's the next sentence is like an argument follows. So it's this cycle. There's always, it seems to be saying that there's a cycle always of war and peace, war and peace. I've been thinking about this a lot. This whole thing of like, can art or literature stop war? Can it contribute to that? And also, what is Finnegan's Wake's role in that? I think part of what Joyce was doing with the Wake is, and this comes up sometimes in the text. This the old tradition of like the monks, like the Irish monks, when there'd be like a crusade or when there'd be like an invasion of the Vikings or whoever that are coming to, pillage the town and kill everybody and burn everything down. They would take their knowledge, they would take all the books and like bury it underground somewhere. And I think that's part of what the Wake is doing, is like gathering all of human history and poetry and philosophy and all these things, gathering it in one space to kind of like preserve it or save it somehow through the destruction that was just starting to pop off while Joyce was finishing the book. Yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
Well, that's good, Peter, and we'll get back to that. Zool, we'll go to you now. How is the Wake a peace manifesto, and can it be an effective? I guess the question is, can the Wake be an effective peace manifesto?
Yes, because it really is asking the question that I pose and that you've just done a round robin on. What does it mean to be human? So, and Patrick used a very important word, in his answer, impulse. So our primordial ancestors, but before they left the waters for the savannah, had impulses. So, what does it mean? Words are problematic, as is any kind of categorization, speciesization. I have a tendency now, I don't look at myself as human particularly anymore. I don't want to limit myself in any way, as Huey Newton puts it in Revolutionary Suicide. The problem is not that our ego is too big, it's too small. So we need to think in terms of our connection. And this is where I think Duncan was going when he talked about when he referred to the Amazon. It takes me to a book that I learned about many years ago that I just adore, The Continuum Concept by Gene Needlaw, which Gabor Mate leaned on very helpfully in his Magnus, his magnum opus last year, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. What is toxic culture? Essentially, we're living now. We've met the singularity, the sci-fi term. What's the singularity? The machine has taken over. We're part of the machine. Really, the machine took over when that character in 2001, raises this first tool, to crush his food or his enemy. We are part of the machine. So I think of a poem that I found just after my mother died and before I gave her eulogy. And it's a poem called Ode to Goby. Gobies are little fish. They're about two different, kinds of, that's it, Duncan. And they're going extinct. So Ode to Goby by Juliana Spark. I won't give you the whole thing, but a little piece of it that I think goes to the answer and to the manifesto. This world that once was so much, now less. This world that was once a luminous archive of things evolved and adapted in slow-moving specificity. This world that Césaire wrote when there was the possibility that it might turn some other way than the nation, a world not of enclosure, but of predatory celebration, liberation, a world of the sparrowhawk, the cynocephalus, the dolphins, and the wolves who feed in the untamed openings. Fled is that music, that world, that rhetorical question, and yet we continue on, angry, unforgiving, unsure.
Yeah. Beautiful, and being comfortable at that unsureness. That's good, Zool. I appreciate you reading a poem. We come from that root of Daniel Berrigan, and there's another great line I like to circulate that I can't remember the exact wordings, but it's basically says, we should let poets run the world. The poets should be the politicians. So, Patrick, you're up. Can the wake be an effective manifesto for peace?
Well, it can be I think it's an effective manifesto, but it will not produce peace necessarily.
You mean you're shooting our whole, you're contrary to our whole, you mean my whole fallacy is wrong, Patrick?
I mean, Joyce said that if people would read Finnegan's Wake, there wouldn't have been a World War II or something to that effect, And, but, I mean, he said that one day when he was feeling that, but I mean, if you look at Finnegan's Wake, it's not, it incorporates everything. It incorporates, viciousness and cruelty and beauty and love. I mean, it's just, it's not just one thing. And, it's like, I was just looking it up, because I was trying to remember it. But there's that line he has that Jacques Derrida made a big deal out of, where he says, "And he war," because he's taking the German word for was, and then the word war, and for some reason I was thinking of the way in which Faulkner sometimes will use the verb was as a noun, in a strange way, and I just don't. I think Finnegan's Wake, I mean, Joyce had a point. If we lived in a world where everyone, for example, had the educational background and had the access to all the tools and had the ability to own copies. In other words, if we lived in a world where everyone could read Finnegan's Wake, and maybe everyone wouldn't want to read it, but, you eliminated all of those walls that block that. I would be willing to say that would be a world where the possibility of peace would be greater than it is right now, where so many people would never be able to, wouldn't even have the time. I bear, sometimes when I'm around you guys, I feel like as an academic, and I don't know how many of you guys are academic. I know you are, Roy, but as an academic, I often feel you guys actually know more about Finnegan's Wake than I do. And I spent about 12 years working on it. But I have to say, I've reached a point where I stopped and because I decided I was not going to spend the rest of my life on this book. But
I just wanted you to do that.
But I mean, but it is kind of remarkable because I think that in my experience, there are all of these reading groups all over the world, and I'm often really impressed with what I learned from these people who are in these groups. I mean, who don't necessarily approach it the way I did, but who have this connection to it that is profound. And so in that sense, I think Joyce was right. I think it has a positive effect, but no, I don't think it would have prevented World War II or what's going on now. But, again, and I will go back to Blake. I mean, Blake talked about mental war and mental fight, and his point was that, yeah, there is aggression in human beings. Yeah, there is conflict, the wars of eternity, he calls them. But the problem is that we transform these mental conflicts into physical conflicts. And so we finally will win the argument by killing our opponent.
Yeah.
And that is, that's the core of the problem, in my view. So, yeah, he created a book that if there was a world that could incorporate that book into its daily life, would probably be a better world.
Yeah.
And it hasn't gotten there yet. You know.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you. That was brilliant because I always thought a bunch of stoner hippie ne'er-do-wells could sell Finnegan's Wake on the home shopping network in the middle of the night. and McLuhan said a half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So we'll go to Roy, then Duncan, and then I got a special question for Jim. But go ahead, Roy. And maybe my question isn't the best, but how effective can the Wake be as a peace manifesto?
Well, I was reading an Ellman where he says, you know, Joyce is complaining. He said, "What's the use of this war? It's distracting people from reading my book." That's the important thing. Yeah. But then Ellman talks about Finnegan's Wake as it's showing the unimportance of war in the total cycle of human activity. He said was made perfectly clear. Which actually I don't agree with that, because you know you think of the Musée room where you have maybe about 30 or 40 battles from history alluded to, and it's all about the battle between the sons against the father. And it seems like that's an eternal situation. And then you have the brother battle book where you have the war between the two brothers, and usually it's over Issy. You know, and Vico, the last cycle begins with the pious and pure wars, and there are allusions to that in the Wake as well. So I don't see it. You know, I don't think he's definitely not a proponent of war, but and he did say that one of the reasons I took Ulysses or Odysseus as my hero was that he was actually a conscientious objector. He really tried to get out of the war in Troy by feigning madness, but he was tricked into enlisting. So I don't know. It's I'd like to think that his Wake could stop the war and usher in the age of Aquarius, but
it could be a good door stop, but I don't know about a war stopper. Okay, Duncan, you're up.
Words cause wars, and James Joyce makes a major assault on words and rhetoric. And actually, I'm more and more, I'm not separating the books. I think that you can't just put Finnegan's Wake out there, that you really have to go through the process of Dubliners, Portrait of an Artist, Ulysses, and then Finnegan's Wake. And if you take that as a unit, Joyce makes an extremely effective, although to have its total effect, we've probably got to wait hundreds, if not thousands of years. But the disassembling of rhetoric and the exposure of rhetoric and the disassembling of words through recombining them and taking languages and doing all that would give an astute student humility when it comes to words. And if you look at, I'm going to pick on the MAGA people for a little while. They really believe in words and bumper sticker phrases, and that makes them extremely violent and dangerous. Okay, so James Joyce is giving us the tools. How well we'll use them remains to be seen. Although I will have to say I'm an optimist, even if we do take things totally down to the ground and destroy the earth. The universe has a lot of time. And it has rebuilt all of this stuff before. And it will rebuild it again. Okay. But just like Ulysses, suppose you could rebuild Dublin, between all of Joyce's works, I'll be a little effusive here, you can rebuild the world.
Yeah, it's good. So you're saying it's like the blueprint to rebuild the world, all of Joyce. In fact, that's what McLuhan said. You can't get me unless you read all of Joyce. You got to read all of Joyce and all the symbolists to get me. And that's why most McLuhanites don't get and even touch the Wake. Peter Quadrino is one of the only Wakians who will quote McLuhan, and Roy did it in his latest book. So, Roy, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to remember what you were saying, Duncan. Kafka said, "Oh yes, there's infinite hope. Only not for us." No, cold comfort, but I don't know.
Yeah, my anti-war friend said, "Hope is for sissies."
I will say that adding Dante on to my reading,
yeah,
has actually done an immense. It's almost like it cast a deep and searching spotlight on Joyce.
Yeah.
Now, Joyce might not agree with that.
Oh yeah,
And he's not around here for me to talk to him. But for me, what Dante has done in the Commedia is astounding. And I'll stop there.
yeah. No, and we encourage everybody to attend Duncan's reading club. It's good. Okay, so we got a lot of directions we can go. I think, Jim, are you still there? Because I have something specific for you. Oh, good.
Yeah.
So Jim's the nature. He's in Mother Nature. It's appropriate. You're teaching us, Jim. So you're not so much a guy who's come to the Finnegan's Wake reading clubs, but you've dabbled deep into everything we talk about, which crosses over to Finnegan's Wake constantly. And you know how important it was for McLuhan, because he had multiple copies of Finnegan's Wake and took a lot of notes and learned a lot from the Wake. And he references it in his book, War and Peace in the Global Village, which I think just a funny thing is we're going to get into music and song. Can music change people? Can movies change people? You know, we know that, but that's what we're doing with mothers singing us lullabies. But this word matristic, if you could talk about that, Jim, in being an effective means to teach people how to achieve peace, or more so, how to sustain a peaceful environment and not military, not resolving conflict with military. Because when we say, oh, Mary Jane was a feminist, then that carries a lot of baggage. And then when we start saying, relating to prehistoric female-led societies based on mother goddess worship, and then that gets into a little too new agey. So we want to be practical and apply this term matristic, which you're sort of leaning towards more in teaching us, should women be running the world, Jim?
Yeah. Well, before we get to whether women could run the world, maybe, I don't know. The matristic meme seems to have been invented in the Stone Age, like 30,000, 40,000 years ago, with those little figurines. They call them Venus figurines. They're not Venus figurines. That's men talking. They're little fat, made of clay and carved of stone and bone. Those are Mother Earth symbols. That's why they're so lumpy, because they are Mother Earth symbols. And this Mother Earth thing was a real focus for these matristic societies. Mother Earth gives birth to us just as mothers give birth to us. So we got to figure out if we could point our religious fervor toward the earth itself. And the times are propitious for that for the first time in 5,000 years, because we see how we're, squandering, killing the planet, or poisoning, let's say. We ain't going to kill it, but we're going to poison it, and we already have. So the focus should go back to nature as the ruling principle, and that could be the source of that was the source of their religion 5,000 years ago. There's a great book called Mother Russia that I found a couple months ago. And in this book, Mother Russia, she talks about, she's a Buddhist follower, I suppose. She says that the Russian peasants, the Ukrainian people of the soil, get tears in their eyes if you start talking about the earth still to this day, because those are the original people. The Ukrainians were the original Buddhist people, along with the adjacent Black Sea people and so on. But anyway, it was deep for people who feel the processes of growth and birth and growth and death and regeneration, which they do in agricultural society. So that's where their heads were at, their hearts were. The sky god had not been invented. In fact, the sky god was invented by the warriors. So the patriarchal warriors. So anyway, where was I going with this? What was the question?
Well, it was basically you covered a lot of ground. You grounded us, Jim, in the earth.
That's
you
where
said,
we're going.
hold on one second, Zool. You said a lot because we're trying to talk about the wake as a peace manifesto or Mama Fista, and so we were just sussing out the word matristic. Why matristic, which is rooted in matrix, is a better word because it doesn't kookify new agey, that this is a practical plan.
That's right. Can I just add?
Please.
That MAT root goes for matrix, which is the womb. That's the original Greek word for womb. It goes for mother, mater. It goes for matter, the stuff of the world. Matter is named after the mother. Mother and matter are just right there together, Yeah. So this is so basic. It's so basic that we're created out of this dirt or this fiery neighborhood where dirt gets warmed up enough to grow things. Plus a little water.
We need that mother's milk, just as the Red Hot Chili Peppers taught us. Mother's milk. And then the word earth, which you promoted so well there, has the word art in the middle of it. So that leads to our next question. But go ahead, Zool. You were going to add something.
Well, Jim is, got right to the stuffing here, to the root of it. Mother Earth. This is where we live. This is who gives us life. This is who gives us food. We are what we eat as well as what we read and everything else. And there's so much here that everybody's touched on in terms of nature, but really getting to, Mother Earth, I think that's, something that Thich Nhat Hanh kept getting back to in pieces at every step in all of his books. And I condensed Thich Nhat Hanh to one run-on sentence, which I'll give you. And then there are a couple of things that I want to comment on what Roy and Patrick and Duncan and Peter and you have said. And Jim, so here, this is my mantra now. That's the best. Think before reacting. Look for a non-violent solution. Respect yourself. Care for others. Use your transforming power. And if we have time at the end, if you want to close with this, it's a little long, but my favorite poem of Daniel Berrigan's is Zen poem. It's a little long, but you'll tell me, Jerry, if we have time.
Well, we'll close out with it, Zool. I got a couple more round robin questions, and we welcome anybody. But go ahead. You got something, and then Duncan.
Yeah, very important about the movies. Go to Gore Vidal's Hollywood. All right, which is not about Hollywood. It's about Washington, and it's about Washington before, during, and after the war to end all wars. What was it about Hollywood? They discovered that the movies were more important than the written word, that you
Yeah.
could get more people across the world, and that this was now the greatest propaganda. And this is when the machinery of war really moved into media, even
Yeah.
though we've yet to get the atomic bomb and drones and all this other crap, you know. But it's interesting, you know, Patrick brought up, you know, Faulkner, who I think was our greatest Southern writer, but our next greatest is really Cormac McCarthy. And if
Yeah.
you've read McCarthy's Blood Meridian, and all his books are amazing, the character of the judge essentially says, you know, it's war that defines the human, that we can't be human without that. And then you go to all the sacred texts, whether it's the Bible, the Torah, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Iliad, you know, all of these things, you know, it's always about war, and it's usually men fighting over a woman. So you could also read the second paragraph that Roy referred to in the Wake when he talked about the Penn Isolate War. You could talk about it as the penis bullet war. You know, so one last thing, I love that Duncan, you know, keeps going back to Dante, and yet Jerry, you and Peter keep going forward to McLuhan. So in McLuhan's triumvirate, there's grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And what have they done for us? Yeah. So yeah, the universe will go on without us. And you know, right now, you know, biodiversity is a bigger problem than global warming. We're losing so many species so quickly. You know, there's nowhere left to go for most of the species on the planet. The animals can go to higher ground, but the people and the creatures in the sea can only go so far to the poles, you know. So we're running out. The universe will go on.
Yeah. Very good. I agree. And you know, D.W. Griffith said 100 years ago that in 2024, which is this year, the year we're living in, cinema will end warfare. It's like, good luck. But, you know, he knew carrying around a copy of Dickens in his back pocket, all he was doing was filming plays, and he was propagating war. That's the 130 years of cinema has been propagating war. Now, there's been some great peace films, Battle of Algiers, or films that we could contribute towards thinking about non-military conflict resolution. And Sidney Lumet said, cinema can't do diddly squat, but it ain't going to keep me from trying. And Michael Moore was approached by Jean-Luc Godard when he premiered Fahrenheit 411. He said, your film's going to help Bush get elected. Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers. So, you know, I am a cinema person, but I do think it's a horrible art form, and it's really hasn't been used to its full potential. And I hope the best for it. But I'm addicted to it as well as many of us. And kids can't even watch feature films anymore. So can films do anything? You know, is the basic question. And can songs do anything? You know, so the question is about tipping points. You know, what happened was Lewis Hines published photos of child labor in printed matter. And this led to laws against child labor. Upton Sinclair wrote a book about the meatpacking industry in Chicago, the jungle, and it led to laws that changed that situation. We know that printed matter can change things. I'm sure you guys are smart enough to know there's other books that literally change things in America. Uncle Tom's Cabin, I've been told that one is. But before I ask the question, Duncan, did you want to ask a pipe in? Do you remember what you were going to say?
I was going to say that I needed to run out to one of my pump houses and turn off the heater that I was testing because it's going to get bitterly cold.
What does it have to do with war?
Yeah, that's a
I had
practical.
to do it before the sun set.
That's a practical, grounded human being. He took Jim literally. So basically,
But you know, Terry, movies like books are predictive. You know, you talked about Upton Sinclair. Go to It Can Happen Here. So his fictional president, we got elected here.
Yeah. That's effects precede causes, even though a line I've been throwing around for years. Tesla, I read 2 days ago, Tesla has said there is no effects precede causes.
You heard it first.
I've had that idea shot down. But the basic question is, we know that printed matter can lead as a tipping point to change laws. I'm not for laws. I'm just saying we know printed matter can change things, but we know that it has, or we can kind of prove that it can lead to changing laws. But can any music, theater, art, or film actually be a tipping point to change laws? Because what we're leading towards here is, if our hope is that the wake could be a peace manifesto, how do we get peace? You know, this is the age-old question when you talk politics. This is what's wrong. What can we do to fix it? How can we replace it with a better plan, a better strategy? That's what we're after. So I'm all for the wake being a peace manifesto, and I want to propagate that. And that goes along with the fact that we can show and prove kind of how books have been the tipping point to change laws. Could we make a law that says, nope, you can only have drones fight drones? Or as Robin Williams taught me so well, we should fight wars with rubber chickens and throw them at each other and say, your mama wears army boots. You know, like fight wars with. So the question basically is, can you tell me any music, theater, art, or film that actually was the tipping point to change a law? And I'm all for songs like We Shall Overcome. Songs are important. In fact, a very important person I had on my podcast said the other day, when I said Cindy Sheehan was an anti-war protester right where Duncan lives in Texas, in Bush's front yard. And she said, we're just talking to the choir and there ain't even a choir. So he said, but that is how we teach people and make them sing. So we want to make people be readers of the wake. You know, and are you a commentator or an activist? So music can be a commentary, a film or an art or a theater piece can be a commentary, but how can it be an activist? So I don't know what I'm talking about, but you guys sort of get a hunch of where I'm going. Roy, can you discuss the sort of possibilities of these other art forms besides printed matter? Because we're all book people. We know books are better than all this other crap.
Well, I mean, you said you thought that Stanley Kubrick had failed in Dr. Strangelove.
I don't think he failed. No, I'm sorry.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood that, but
yeah.
You said that. Jim said it. I'm sorry.
Jim said it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I remember the nuclear terror from the '60s, and those movies like Fail Safe, and especially Dr. Strangelove and the Bedford incident. I didn't feel like they were going to prevent war, but I thought that they were helping people process the madness of it, at least in this country. I don't,
well, that's good. You're saying helping people process. So yeah, like let's go to you, Peter. Does Wu-Tang Clan did they have an effect on you in raising your consciousness on words? Being like, look at what Zool has on his T-shirt, make hip hop. That's right up, not war. That's
Yeah,
like,
it's a great.
what did they do? Go ahead, Peter. You know what I'm asking.
Yeah, I like that shirt, and it aligns with something I've been thinking about throughout this discussion, which is like ways to have kind of a safety valve to release the aggressions of nations without murdering people. And like, if you've ever seen clips of battle rap, it's called, where it's two guys rapping and they'll get right face to face and they're just screaming and insulting and all this, and they might even have like their whole gang or team around them, and nobody's fighting, nobody's actually getting into a fight. They're blowing off all this steam just with words and with raps, and somehow it always works. It always keeps the peace. I think sometimes about this with sports too. Like, what if we use the Olympics to decide, global conflicts or something like that? Like blowing off steam somehow in a way that might be aggressive and use all kinds of different techniques and strategies and things like that. But you're not actually slaughtering the other human beings. You're acknowledging that, that's kind of horrific and we should get beyond that. But you could still have rules or something saying, we're gonna allow for this and allow for that, and whoever wins under these rules, then you get to take the territory or whatever is at stake here.
That's really good, Peter. Oh, go ahead, Zool.
Yeah, no, this is really important because my decades now of experience in as a non-violent marshal in all kinds of different actions is in one way or another to keep people talking, even if it's at a very high decibel level, to keep them talking. Keep them talking. So, you're really going to go to can diplomacy stop war? And ultimately, I think it can. Now, when I talk about hip hop, and this shirt is actually from a group that a friend of mine started, Reverend Yearwood, many years ago. It's called the Hip Hop Caucus. Great people, and they got into climate very, very early on, as did our group Veterans of Peace, which did a lot of work with the Camp Casey and moved out of that. Is that feedback on my end, Jerry?
I don't know, but we're dealing with
like it.
Let me go on. Just a couple of things in terms of. So for me, hip hop is all media. It's music of all kinds. Certainly, it's roots-based classic American music. It's blues. It's jazz. It's fusion. But it is dance. It is graffiti. It is art that you can name. It's it's theater. It's fashion. So all media are books of one form or another. And what's a book today? It's this thing as much as it's any other. And of course, we're glued to our screens and everything. But have books and other media help to create laws? Yeah. You mentioned Sinclair Lewis. Without that book, we would not have gotten food safety. Ralph Nader's unsafe.
That's Upton Sinclair, by the way.
Sorry.
That's Upton Sinclair.
Yes, correct. I'm sorry. Thank you. Upton Sinclair.
In Zool, this is a great. My friend taught me. I said, has any other art form been the tipping point besides books? And he said, Ralph Nader's press conferences as performance art changed the laws for the seatbelt. So that was a good example. That was concrete. He said, as performance art. Yeah.
Well, were it not for that book, he would not have become the golden boy of the Democrats at that time and be called in for, press conference and congressional hearing one after the other. From that, we got not only auto safety, but airline safety. And we got the entire EPA under Richard Nixon. And just a quick aside to go back to something Peter said about JFK. Most people in this country, the most educated, don't even know that under Ted Kennedy, the JFK and the Martin Luther King investigations were both reopened 20 years later. And the Senate, the U.S. Senate said, of course, the killing of JFK was a conspiracy between rogue elements of the CIA, the various black desk of police departments in New Orleans, Chicago, New York, and LA, and so forth. Very interesting that Teddy was afraid to open the case of RFK. Whole other salon here. But,
Hello.
I just want to leave it at that and give the rest of the
Good. Now, but let's go to Patrick, because Patrick, you are a film scholar and you love film, and you know I'm being a hypocrite when I say I hate films and they suck. Because I'm addicted to film as much as anyone else, having watched all of Woody Allen's films over the last few months with my wife. But Patrick, go ahead. You know the premise, what we're talking about here, unless you want me to restate it.
Well, you know, what I'm going to get at is just mention that the second book of my long poem is called Cinematic Revolutions.
Nice.
And but it's not arguing. It's not, at least I don't intend to argue that, you know, like that there's, you know, some massive political movement that cinema realizes, but rather I think the mistake we make is that we tend to want to posit, okay, there's this work and this work produced this effect, you know, and maybe Upton Sinclair did do that, and that's great, you know, but obviously you can't do that with Finnegan's Wake. I mean, you can't find one law that was changed just because of Finnegan's Wake, but does that mean Finnegan's Wake is worthless? I don't think so. I mean, I think that the reason I refer to a cinematic revolution, in book 3 of my poem, I start bringing in blues and rock and roll as part of this sort of process. And these things, each individual work has probably limited effects. But if you put them all together, you know, you see a drift within human history, a movement. And, you know, I think, you know, the problem we have is that what we want is an end to the movement. We want to reach the conclusion, and the conclusion must be a good one. You know, we don't want some nightmare conclusion. But my view increasingly is that there is no end.
Yeah.
It's just process. And I think cinematic art is profoundly democratic, but I take cinematic art to refer to everything, not just what's on at movie theaters, but everything, YouTube, and I would even throw in popular music, because I think popular music has a relation. So many of the songs that I love and I found in movies, including classical music too. Come to think of it, thanks to Stanley Kubrick, I got a musical education. And that's all I can say. I mean, I think. I think the works like Finnegan's Wake and maybe certain movies that may be difficult to access for some people or to understand it that way still have an effect, and that effect ripples, you know, and you don't really know where things start and where they end. By the way, I just want to mention one thing. That movie that Terrence Malick made, I think it's called A Hidden Life.
Tree of Life.
No, this is late. It was.
Okay. It's not Tree of Life.
Last movie, but I'm not sure. It's about a German or Swiss. I can't remember, but you know, and the guy refuses to fight. Yeah. And he's eventually executed at the end. It's a rather long movie, and it's done in that Malick style, you know, very impressionistic and moments. But it was, I thought, a very good film. But I mean, I don't think a film like that, of course, is going to change the world dramatically. It's almost like, but just the power of one human being simply not to go along when almost everybody else is going along. And but the thing is that we tend to think, oh, that's just individuals. What about the masses, the multitude? But see, I believe that, you know, just as evil is in everyone, good is in everyone. And so when you put that out there, you make a point, and that point goes into the, you know, the archive, so to speak, and it's there. You can't get rid of it. And so it continues to have these effects. And that's, to me, is the value of whatever we do. I believe in the power of small acts.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
and not. So I don't think the work that's going to change the world will ever come. Even Finnegan's Wake is
Yeah.
fascinating as it is, but I do think that there's a inertia to the good, just as there's inertia to the bad. And
Really good point, Patrick, because I knew a great character actor, Timothy Carey, and they'd ask him, "What's your favorite film?" And he was in Elia Kazan's films and Cassavetes and Kubrick, and he says, "The next film I'm going to make." he always wanted to move the project forward. And you said two things that were amazing. The ripple effect is what the word wake means. The wake is what ripples at behind a boat. So your words evoke more than their meaning. And the revolution is two people talking. That's what I was taught, and I really believe it. Okay, Duncan, you're up. You want me to rephrase the question, or you know where we're going?
Might as well. Let's
Okay. Can we know that books can be a tipping point to change a law? Can art, film, music, or theater do the same? Because we're hopeful that the way could do something, but can these other art forms really be an affecting tipping point to change a law? I know it changes us, but
that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Sometimes, but sometimes it's for better laws, and sometimes it's for worser laws.
Yeah.
I mean, art. The problem with an open-ended question like "Can art bring world peace or whatever" is, what kind of art are you talking about? There's a lot of fucking bad art in the world.
Some of this would help make
it's
some of it.
easier to make.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more of it. So can what are considered written works or artistic works make a serious change in the world? Yes. Is it always for good? No. Is it always for bad? No. Does it always stay the same? No. That's why an artist needs to follow their artistic muse, as it were, because they can't know. For an artist to set out to bring world peace is pretty much a guarantee it's going to be not very good art. That's just the way it is.
The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. You just make your art.
So they say.
Yeah. But let's close out, and I welcome anybody else's round robin question, and then we'll have Zool read Bergen. But let's close out with, the art movements that had the biggest impact on me were Dada and Surrealism. And then it took me years before I really realized, well, they happened because of war. Could Dada and Surrealism happen if there was no war? I know it's a stupid question, but we'll start with you, Roy. Just basically, could it work in reverse? Would we still have had Dada and Surrealism if there was no war?
Well, I mean, certainly, yeah, it was talking about, using art to process things. I'm sure that was a way of processing the madness of war. But I actually, what I was thinking of something that Patrick said about, it's not, there's no endpoint. I mean, it's like a continual process, and I think it's an adjustment of balance. And I think it's probably it's not a good thing for a culture to be too violent, but probably it's just as bad to be too passive. And I was thinking of the Time Machine, the Eloy and the Morlocks. The Eloy are these kind of passive hippie people who won't lift their finger to save someone who's drowning, and they're controlled by the Morlocks, who are this underground vicious race. But I just wanted to end. Actually, I was thinking of the poem by Yeats. I mean, there's some great art which you could see might interpret as pro-war, And, and under Ben Bolvin, Yeats says, you that Mitchell's prayer have heard, send war in our time, O Lord. And, John Mitchell, who wrote the jail journal, he was very distressed by the passivity of the Irish during the famine, and that as England was exporting food from Ireland while the Irish were starving to death, they did not take up arms. He thought because of Daniel O'Connell. So he was in that sense, he saw war as sometimes necessary and sometimes positive, and depending on the as a point of context, as they said,
That's good. I always have problem with the song, I ain't going to study war no more. I was like, well, what? You should study war because that's, and every day Amy goes, the War and Peace Report. Well, why are you saying the word war? Why don't you just say peace? So we've got to realize that the big picture is what we're after, and take the services and the disservices and get comprehensive awareness. Go ahead, Roy.
But that's one thing that Jung says, that I think it was Neville Chamberlain said, I have no imagination for evil.
Yeah,
you really better have an imagination.
Yeah, or when they ask,
doesn't mean you have to be evil.
Yeah, but Paul Krasner asked his guru, "Why is there evil in the world?" And he said, "To thicken the plot."
Paul Krasner had a guru.
Well, somebody looked up to, yeah. Okay, Patrick, you're up, and then we'll do a Duncan and Zool, and go ahead.
What's the question again?
If there was no war, would we still have gotten Dada and surrealism? I mean, it's just sort of this reverse. It's sort of effects precede causes. Back to Tesla. Is it really true that there is no effects precede causes?
Well, I think that I don't want to say reflects, but art is embedded in history. So there's no getting around it. I mean, great satire is almost always about horrible things, that go on. And so I do think that's one of the consequences. But, it's kind of like that argument when I was teaching film sometimes, my students would want to talk about censorship, like, should we censor certain films, and maybe if we censored all violent films, then there'd be no violence and everything. And I always made the point, and I admit this may be a rationalization, I don't know, that that I don't think that would work. It would just send it somewhere else.
Yeah.
What we should do is teach films.
Yeah.
Is teach ways of discussing and understanding and analyzing them.
Yeah.
Because they're always about something, in our lives and and also in our psyches, So it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
It's good, Patrick, because that's, Billie Eilish learned how to have sex by watching violent porn. And her mom freaked out when she admitted it on Howard Stern. It's like, what? And so, this is like, does violent porn cause the kid to become violent, or does it alleviate them of being violent? So, what you're saying is teach media literacy. That's what McLuhan was saying. Learn the meaning of meaning. You learn the meaning of meaning. Okay. Wait, we did Duncan. Did you? Okay, you're up. Would we have had Dada and surrealism if there was no war?
I do agree that Dada and surrealism and some of the other art movements right after the First World War, as a result of the fact that prior to the First World War, the Europeans and the English were strutting around, being very proud of being a fact-based, logical culture that was going to get beyond all that stupid religious stuff. And then they turned out to be truly monstrous, created one of the worst fucking wars ever. And the Dadaist and the Surrealist maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, we're saying, see, just being logical and fact-based is not going to do it. There's got to be more. And they were also doing some pre-Joycean stuff of exposing language and logic and that mashups. This is an early mashup type thing. Would it have happened without the war? Yeah, because there's been similar things that happened in Russia when the bureaucracy was so stultifying that life became unbearably tedious, and had some very strong artists come out of that media. So art tends to feed off of the culture.
Yeah.
And what's happening in the culture. And if the culture is too much one way, violence, for example, it's going to have a reaction against that. If it's too much tedium, which the beat movement in the U.S. was largely a response to the gray flannel suit and the tedium of 50s culture. So
they needed themselves some Slim Gaillard, who's all the lyrics of Slim Gaillard were memorized by Nancy and Ronald Reagan. So that's another salon. So, but before we go to Zool, because you can close this out, Zool, I want to thank you guys. It's been an amazing time. It taught me a lot, and it really helps me in processing all this, because I'm giving this salon in Detroit, Michigan at the Farmington Film Festival. And I'm debating whether I should call it Can Art Stop War with no question mark, 1. Can Art Stop War 2 with a question mark, or change it to Only Art Stops War? Which one would you pick, Duncan, for after doing this for 2 hours? I only get an hour with 12, 20 people in a room doing this.
me, I'm too verbose. I'd probably say something. How and to what degree can art have a moderating effect on war?
Good. But if you had those 3 choices, which one would you do? Can art stop war or only art stops war?
I would do Can Art Stop War? Question mark.
Good. Thank you. Okay, Roy.
Make art, not war. Wow.
That's a good one.
Tell art to
like
stop
it.
war.
Make art, not war is a good one. Okay, Patrick.
I'm going to go with Make Art, Not War. I like it.
Uh-oh, that got 2 votes. Okay, Zool, which one?
Can art, all caps, no punctuation.
Ah.
Oh,
Yeah,
just
I have
can
to
art.
decide, right?
No ellipsis at the end.
Don't use the word stop or war. Okay.
2 words.
Now,
I'm a ruthless editor.
Zool, your answer on that question about would we
I'm
have
going
had
to reformulate the question without stating it and just give the answer. And
Go ahead.
without the drawings in Lesko Cavern, there would be no data. So
yeah, that's good.
Either DA data art or DATA, So, but then I just want to say something about government. And I think there is good government that can come into being in our lifetime, and that's self-government.
Yeah.
What can government is what comes out of here, what goes in here, and what we do with these things. And that can make a huge difference in our relationships, one-on-one, all around the world. It's been an incredible pleasure to be with all of you today. I must tell you, this has been very exciting. Just one more thing. Humility really is at the root of everything here. You've stated it before, Jerry. You hear that throughout Talmud. One of the great rabbis who I adore was Nachman of Bratslav, who said, the world is a very narrow bridge, and we must cross it without fear. And then just 2 final things, 2 quotes before I get to Dan's poem. 2 separate verses from T.S. Eliot. One just about, our present human condition. On screen and off, and within the screen, that's the singularity. We are distracted from distraction by distraction. And
Yeah.
then the other speaking to the structure of Finnegan's Wake itself, and to some of the things that Duncan was talking about, the universe and going on, and there being no end. And this is T.S. Eliot saying, time past and time future are perhaps contained in time present. Well, I think there's no perhaps about it. I think Einstein proved that with relativity. Time past and time future are contained in time present. Okay.
Yes.
So
Now, just before you do this, these gentlemen are feel free to be excused. You guys have been milked for 2 hours and contributed a lot. Zool's going to read a poem by Daniel Berrigan. Don't feel like you are obliged to stick around because you can watch it later on replay. But if you want to stick around, we do want to thank you. We thank Peter and Jim for showing up too. But Duncan, Roy, Patrick, Zool, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I've learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Pleasure for me too.
I assume I wouldn't want to have to leave if it's a very long poem. But if it's 5-10 minutes.
it's less than that. It's about 4.5 minutes.
Okay, not a problem.
Our art is long,
But and then it's good. It can last, until we convert all of it to these, forms that, may very well disappear on us. That's why we do like the written page. And you can go to the library, or you can go to the Library of Congress. There are a whole lot of things that we can do with this.
Well, Zool, we're old guys. We have to pee when we're peeing.
It's true. my dad taught us when my brother and I will
pee here now.
Yeah, pee here now. Yeah, that's a very good Sufi meditation in itself. But Dad said to us when we were boys and we'd be on a road trip, we'd pass, we'd stop at a gas station and said, "You better go to the restroom." I said, "Dad, we don't need to." And he would say, "Never miss an opportunity." Now that we've surpassed his age, man, was he right.
Yeah, I'm going to disappear, but I'm hearing it in the back. But I got to tell you one more pee joke. The guy goes, the doctor says, "I'm having trouble peeing." He goes, "How old are you?" He says, 80. He says, "You peed enough."
Okay. In conclusion, Zen poem by Daniel Berrigan. How I long for supernatural powers, said the novice mournfully to the Holy One. I see a dead child and I long to say, "Arise." I see a sick man. I long to say, "Be healed." I see a bent old woman. I long to say, "Walk straight." Alas, I feel like a dead stick in paradise. Master, can you confer on me supernatural powers? The old man shook his head fretfully. How long have I been with you and you know nothing? How long have you known me and learned nothing? Listen, I have walked the earth for 80 years. I have never raised a dead child. I have never healed a sick man. I have never straightened an old woman's spine. Children die, men grow sick, the aged fall under a stigma of frost. And what is that to you or me but the turn of the wheel, but the way of the world, but the gateway to paradise? Supernatural powers. Then you would play God, would spin the thread of life and measure the thread 5 years, 50 years, 80 years, and cut the thread. Supernatural powers. I have wandered the earth for 80 years, I confess to you. Sprout without root, root without flower. I know nothing of supernatural powers. I have yet to perfect my natural powers, to see and not be seduced, to hear and not to be deafened, to taste and not to be eaten, to touch and not to be bought. But you, would you walk on water? Would you master the air? Would you swallow fire? Go talk with the dolphins. They will teach you glibly how to grow gills. Go listen to eagles. They will hatch you, nest you, eaglet and airman. Go join the circus. Those tricksters will teach you in deception for dimes. Birdman, bagman, poor fish spouting fire, moon crawling at sea forever, supernatural powers. Do
Okay.
you seek miracles? Listen, go draw water, hew wood, break stones. How miraculous! Listen, blessed is the one who walks the earth 5 years, 50 years, 80 years, and deceives no one, and curses no one, and kills no one. On such a one, the angels whisper in wonder, behold, the irresistible power of natural powers, of height, of joy, of soul, of non-belittling. You dry stick in the crude soil of this world, spring, root, leaf, flower, trace around and around and around, an inch, a mile, the world's green extent, a liberated zone of paradise.
Very good.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zool, and thank you all. It's been an amazing time, and I think there is hope.
Okay.
Yeah, I second that.
I hope this never ends. We keep talking forever and ever. Thank you, Zool. Thank you,
Without
Pat.
objection, we have you.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Duncan.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
What a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Mark.
Appreciate it.
Happy New
Good
Year.
night, gentlemen.